Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wristwatch Revival. I'm Marshall, and this time around we have a super exciting watch. This is an Abercrombie Fitch Super Shipmate. This is dates to around the 1950s. It's very old, and I got it on eBay. As you can see, really bad shape too. This thing is tore up. The seconds hand is just completely floating around in the case. It looks fairly beat up as well, though. Maybe the dial's actually in okay shape. It's kind of hard to tell. It's a non-runner. It won't work at all. In fact, nothing works on it currently. So that's a little bit concerning, and I don't really know what to expect from this watch just yet. But it looks to be actually completely original. It even said that the strap was original. It says pigskin on it, which we don't even do that anymore. And it looks pretty original. It's all shrunk down. There's the buckle. It's got some rust on it, and there's a little bit of rust here and there on the watch as well. So I'm not really sure what to make of it. But today on the channel, we're going to take this thing apart and see if we can get it running. It's a beautiful watch with a lot of cool history. If you don't know, Abercrombie & Fitch, they used to actually be a full-on outdoor retailer, like the outfitter in New York City. And they would actually, you can see it, this one was made in Switzerland. They would actually contract companies from Switzerland, watch companies, to make watch specific for their needs. Now, this is one of their more basic watches, just time only, but a lot of them had some cool complications and stuff. At any rate, the first things first is we need to get the case back off. So I've got my case back opener out here, and this is basically just a device that lets you lock down the case and then use any number of different fittings, which you can see on the lower right there. And what they do is they fit into the different fittings on the case back of a watch. In this case, we're going to use the kind of basic one. And then that allows you to use the big wheel that was on the top there to apply some leverage to the case back and open it. And on watches like this, I usually just try to open them up with like a rubber ball. There's like a special type of rubber ball that you can use that really grips the back, and it wouldn't open up. This one was actually on pretty good. But when you use a machine like this, it usually lets go pretty easy. And there we go. You can see we've got some movement right away. These machines work really well. It's easy to scratch up the back. So you have to be really careful about getting it set up properly before you do so. All right, case back removed, and this is a big moment. We get to see what the heck's going on inside this case back. First, though, let's get this strap taken off here so that we can have good access to the case and not have it flopping around and maybe getting dirt in there or whatever. And by the way, check out those lugs. Those look like original lugs. They are really nasty. All right, here we go. Let's see what's inside. Ooh, this looks actually really good. So Abercrombie & Fitch signed movement there, and as you can see, the case back is also signed Abercrombie & Fitch. And all in all, there's some rust around the inside of the ring, so it looks like this has been weathered pretty well. But the movement itself actually looks very good, quite clean, in fact. And what I'm hoping here, of course, is that it just needs a good service, and then it'll be good to go. But you never really know with these, especially with these super old watches. So first, let's try to get the movement out of the case. And that, of course, means that we need to take out the winding stem. And you can see that there's two case clamps holding it down. So we need to remove those in order to take the movement out of the case and actually get a good look at what's going on with it. Again, it's not working, as you can see. And there's a movement ring in here as well that needs to come out. And then it looks like this is actually bent. So I'm going to have to figure out what's going on with that. But the movement and the dial and everything do pop out, although it looks like the that second hand is just kind of hanging around in the case. That's concerning for sure. And you can see the case is pretty rusted on the inside, and the crystal's pretty banged up too. Very well could be the original. I like to try to just take a quick poke at the balance. It does look like it's spinning freely, but it certainly isn't receiving any power. Nothing's actually going to it. So first things first, let's take the hands off. I try to, move the hands to be perfectly lined up, but they won't move at all. They're just completely jammed up. So maybe something going on with the keyless works. It's hard to say on a watch this old. Kind of interesting. I point out there's rust marks where both the hour and minute hands were. It kind of shows exactly what time it was when this watch stopped working, and probably hasn't been working for years and years and years. All right, dial feet need to be unsecured here with these screws, and as you can see, fairly typical on old watches, 2 different size screws. People have been working on these or whatever. But the dial comes off and looks fine. It looks like it's actually held up really well, all told, which is nice. Because there's no way I'm getting another dial for this thing. So let's flip it over and start working on the movement. Like I said, the good news is the case really does look like it did its job. It's the movement's fairly clean. At least on a big picture level. I mean, it wouldn't be shocking to me if I found a bunch of rust and debris in here, and I didn't. So that's really promising for getting this thing running again. First things first, let's take off the balance. The reason I do this is just to make sure that it's safe. The balance spring, otherwise known as the hairspring, is probably the most delicate part on a watch. It's just an absolutely minuscule spring. And if it gets jammed or bent, it completely screws up the whole watch. So that's a good one to just take off the watch and get it out of the way so that you can start working on the rest of it without having to worry about damaging that. So next up is what we call the motion works. And the motion works is what moves the hands on a watch. And this just comes right off. Normally there's a cannon pinion there that's friction mounted, but it just comes right off here. So I'm not sure what's up with that. So that's the majority of the motion works coming out. And that means that we can go back over to the other side of the watch and start taking apart the beefy mechanical stuff over here. And I'll start by getting at the pallets. And of course, you want to be extra careful with the pallets as they are very thin and delicate. And those of you who are really into watches and movements and stuff will notice at the bottom of the movement, right by where my tweezers are here, it says 2390, and then there's a logo there. And that logo next to it says ETA or ETA. And that is traditionally the largest manufacturer of movements out of Switzerland. In fact, they design movements for almost all major watch brands at some time or another. Now, interestingly here, when I do take the pallets off, all of a sudden the watch starts unwinding. Now, I tried to unwind it, but it wouldn't let me. And so there's something that was bound up in between or that was being held up there. And as you can see, it's actually unwinding, well, all of the mainspring now. So it was wound up before, it just was stuck. Something was preventing it from running that whole time. And I don't really see any other way than to just sort of let it finish. So I'm just going to wait. And it even speeds up faster now. It looks like it's just about out of gas finally. So I'm just going to use a little bit of pegwood just to help it along that last little stretch to make sure that mainspring is just completely done, but it's not quite done yet. It still has more to go. But as you can see, this watch is not running well. The power is not being delivered in a smooth fashion through the train of wheels. It's stopping and starting, and there was something holding up the whole thing. So definitely it's going to need at least a service to get running again. So yeah, this is an ETA 2390 movement, which is a fairly common time-only movement out of Switzerland. It's a nice one. Abercrombie & Fitch was very expensive, high-end outfitter in its day. They had a massive store in New York City that was their flagship. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, like that range, and it did actually go for quite a long time. But I've seen some pictures of it, some drawings of it and stuff from back in the day, and it was absurd. They had like stuffed elephants in the lobby, apparently, all types of stuff like that. You could get anything that you wanted to go adventuring or hiking or camping or on a safari, apparently. And this, of course, I make like a classic mistake. That spring didn't look like it actually had tension on it, but apparently it did. And so it pinged off, but only just on my bench, thankfully. That's actually the click that I'm taking out there. That's the thing that stops the mainspring from unwinding. Just testing the side shake here on that barrel. Sometimes on old watches, that part can get really worn out and it'll just shake all over the place. And you know that could be part of the reason why the watch isn't running properly. So I just gave it a quick check. And now we can remove the barrel bridge. And I have to say, so far, so good with this thing. Again, it's not working, so that's concerning. But as far as visual inspections go at my experience level, which I'll remind you is not super high. I'm very much an amateur at watchmaking. But again, just with my limited experience and what I know from this stuff, it's okay. There we go. Barrel bridge free at last. And I'm going to try to take the barrel out, but it's being a little bit fussy. And I decide, you know what, I can just take out the train of wheels. Those are the ones that are covering it, and it'll probably just come out easier. So I'll just leave it in there for a minute. So this is what we call the train wheel bridge. This is the part that kind of connects all the train wheels together and make sure that they stay in the exact place that they're supposed to be so that they can run. Whoop. So there's the fourth wheel. And I'll just take the barrel out now. Looks fine. And the escape wheel, and then the third wheel last. Again, I'm just giving them like a cursory inspection, just seeing if there's anything obviously broken or rusted on them, and there's not. So all in all, this thing looks okay. And that means we can flip it over and start getting working back on the keyless work. So this is the part that was jammed up that wouldn't let me set the hours. I couldn't turn the crown to have the hours actually get set. All right, so once again, I'm going to use a piece of pegwood here to keep this spring locked down so that when I take it out, it doesn't go flying off. And it does anyway, but again, it only went on the ground. I'm trying to get better at that, but it's actually really tricky. And this is what we call the yoke or the return bar. And then, of course, the other two parts that were being held in place by that just fell down to the bench. And again, all in all, this movement actually looks pretty good. I'm kind of excited because for a non-working movement, there's all types of disasters that you can find, and we didn't find them. I still need to get the mainspring out of the barrel. And to do this, I have to release the barrel cap. So I just push down on the edges with my fingers. And whoop, there it goes. And then that reveals the barrel arbor, which is the metal part in the middle, and then the mainspring, which is wound around it. When you wind your watch, that's the spring that you're winding. That's the spring that powers everything in a mechanical wristwatch. Every single thing comes off of that. And now it's just a matter of gently removing the spring from the barrel. Even though it seems like the watch industry has come up with a crazy tool for basically every possible thing, apparently getting the mainspring out of the barrel is still something you just have to do by hand. There's just no other reasonable way to do so. I have read that some watchmakers will just leave it in, but that doesn't really make any sense to me because it gets dirty for starters and probably needs a little bit of help along that line, but also you can't really inspect it if it's in there. All right, so mainspring out. And now we can start putting everything into the watch cleaning machine. So what we need to do now is put everything into the baskets that go into the watch cleaning machine. And basically the way this works is the big stuff goes on the bottom basket and the little delicate stuff goes on the top. And that's the top of the basket there. And you see it has these grooves in it where you can set little delicate parts inside. And every single part basically goes in this thing with a couple of exceptions. But for the most part, everything goes in. And one little thing that I forgot, but wanted to make sure I got on there, was the balance again. So you can just put the balance in, but then it's just sort of flying around. And that's really not where you want to be because, again, it can get damaged so easily. So one method is to put it back on the main plate here before you put it in the watch cleaning machine. And that holds it in place and also gives it some kind of metal protection around the edges of it, just to make sure that it doesn't go flying off or get hit by anything. And it's a safe way potentially to wash this thing in the cleaning machine. Now, the thing that you'll note though is the jewel on the top, that ruby jewel they call it, that does need to be cleaned. And if you put it in the watch cleaning machine this way, it won't get cleaned. It needs actually to be removed and then cleaned separately. So we'll have to do that after. But the spring and everything else will get cleaned this way. All right, back in it goes. And we are all ready for the watch cleaning machine. So this is with all the parts having been thoroughly cleaned in the machine and the watch completely disassembled. That's what it looks like if you take the whole thing apart. And that means it's time to get going on getting this thing back together. So the first thing that we need to do is get the barrel with the mainspring in it back together. That means, of course, getting the mainspring back in the barrel. And before we do that, though, I'm going to take a little bit of grease here. This is called Mobius 8200. It's for mainsprings. And I'm just going to get a little bit on my finger cots there and pull that along the line. That just puts the tiniest, thinnest film of that grease on there. But that can help against corrosion, sticking, that kind of thing. You really don't, it's not meant to be fully lubricated. It's just a little tiny bit on there, just a thin film. And now I'm going to use a special tool, a very special tool, especially if you base it on the price of the thing, that is called a mainspring winder. So this lets you wind the mainspring back into a little cap so that it's all wound back up. And then it has a plunger at the back that you can push down, and then it'll push the mainspring out into, ideally, whatever it is that you want to push it into. So in this case, it's back into the mainspring barrel that I have sitting there. So I just wind it back in, then remove the winder part. That's the end with the red dot on it there. And then the whole mainspring will be wound up inside this tool. And you can see it just wound up in there. And then all I do is put it over the barrel and click it into place, and it just shoves the mainspring down into it. And now it's been transferred over, and I can put the barrel arbor back in. So pretty cool. It's nice to have the right tools for the job. You can do this manually, but you run a very high risk of bending or breaking the mainspring. And especially on old watches where it can be hard to find the right mainspring or just tricky to source them and get them fit and everything, this is a great way to do it. Okay, so with that job done, it's time to get cracking on the actual movement itself. And that means we'll start with a train of wheels. So we'll get out all of the wheels that we need for that, plus the bridge. And this is a really important part of the procedure. This is also the part that wasn't working before. So what we want to see here by the time we finish putting all of these in is that the train of wheels can move freely, that it spins freely. And that it was not doing before. So if we can fix that, then that's a big step potentially towards getting this thing running again. Yeah, I'm trying to give it just a little preliminary test, but the reality is that we won't know if this thing spins freely until we get the bridge on top of it, because that's what holds each wheel in its exact position and allows it to spin. Now, I did notice while I was putting these in that I still had the balance on the watch, and I bumped it a little bit, and I'm just like, you know what? Let's just get that thing out of the way. I don't need it to be on here for this part of the build. And for the same reasons that I took it off at the beginning of the job, I'm going to take it off here as well, just to get it out of the way for safekeeping. Because again, it doesn't need to be on the watch for this part. So I realized there, I should just take that off. And I do. So now it's time to put the bridge back on. And basically this is really tricky because there's 4 holes that you can see, and they all have to line up with those colored jewels on the top perfectly and on the ones on the bottom. And if any one of them is off, that bridge will not go on. So it's a real kind of test of patience and very subtle movements of each of those to get them each to line up. And then once that finally all does, the bridge will fall right into place, and then you can secure it with the screws. But until that moment happens, you are applying some amount of pressure, depending on how you do it, to the pivots, to the very tiny metal points at the top and bottom of those wheels, and any one of them can bend or break quite easily. So it really is a tricky job that you have to be very careful on. Now, one of the things that I'll do is grab a piece of pegwood here and hold it down, and that will help me line it up. And as you can see, we now have free movement of the train wheel. So this is a big step for us because it means that we might actually be able to get away with getting this thing running again without having to do any major work or go scouring for replacement parts or whatever. And there you go. You can see it spinning quite freely, especially if I start at the backmost wheel. And the escape wheel's just zipping right along, which is what it should be doing. And now we can put in the mainspring barrel. And it's got to be just a little delicate because it does need to slide in under those wheels, but there's room to do it. And now if I turn the wheel, the mainspring barrel, you can see all the other wheels along the line are spinning, and they're spinning quite freely. So this is good news. Now this is what we call the setting lever screw. This is the screw that I actually unscrewed very early in this build to take out the winder. And that needs to go on first in many of these watches because that plate that I'm about to put on actually covers it up mostly. It leaves a hole so that you can put a screwdriver in there and adjust it, but it doesn't make it like that. Now what I'm doing is an important part here, and this is I'm lubricating, I'm oiling the watch. So right now I'm lubricating the mainspring barrel. So that's the barrel arbor at the top to make sure that it can spin freely within itself. And as you can see, I also have my little loop on at this point too, to try to get in close to make sure that it gets properly oiled. And we'll actually take a closer look at that a little bit further down the line in the video when I do it on the plates themselves. And you can get a chance to see what that looks like and how little, a tiny amount of oil you actually end up using. But for now, the barrel bridge goes back on. And once again, I'm applying lubricant here. This is HP 1300 for those of you who are fellow watchmakers and want to know what kind of lubricant I'm using. And now we can start putting on the ratchet wheel and the crown wheel. And once again, I'm applying just a little tiny bit of lubricant to the side so that these can spin without any friction. It's amazing the tiny, tiny amount of lubricant that is actually correct for watches like this. It's a really small amount. The difference between 0 and too much, or I should say 0 and the amount that you need, is huge. If you do oil these, they perform better for longer and it protects the parts. If you don't at all, they won't run very well for very long. But if you end up putting too much on, that's almost as bad as putting nothing on because it ends up seeping into other parts of the watch and getting gunked up. So here, this is a microscope shot now of me oiling the top there of that bridge that we had put on at first. So it's just a little tiny bit of oil. It needs to fall into that cup and sort of suspend itself in there. If you put too much, it won't suspend. It'll actually just drain through. And if you don't put enough, well, you're just running them dry, and that's not where you want to be either. So there you go, just that much to get the job done. It's really a tiny amount. And but it is cool because using the microscope, we can get up really close and get a chance to see exactly how much that is. And there we go. And what I'm doing there is using a little bit of Rodico. That's that kind of silly putty-like substance. It's like a neutral silly putty stuff that you can use to clean up any oil that I did in excess or that I just sort of splashed around. I mean, maybe that's not the right word, but like that. Like I'm just going to use a little bit to clean that up because I accidentally touched the side of the jewel and I just want to be proper with it. The truth is that if you're a really great watchmaker, you don't often need to do that. If you've been doing this for years, you just sort of have it down. And cleaning up stuff with Rodico is kind of frowned upon at some point because it means that you slipped up. But for where I'm at, I always keep some Rodico around because I'm still practicing. All right, so this is what we call a cap jewel. This will need to be removed, oiled, and cleaned separately. There it is. You can see the bottom of it. It doesn't look bad though. This watch clearly has been serviced in its lifetime. You can tell from a lot of different parts on it, to be honest. But it certainly doesn't seem like it has been recently, as the watch had come to a complete halt. Okay, so now we put the cap jewel back on and then screw that back down. This is one of the many ways that they do that. Okay, now it's time to start with the keyless work, or excuse me, the click. So this was actually a mistake that I made. So I realized after that I never reinstalled the click. Normally the click goes on at the same time as these wheels, but this one was different. And what that means is I need to actually start over again with that, take off those wheels, and then put the click in. This is kind of actually a really cool design for a click. I've never seen one like this. It's a really simple thing with a spring and then two posts. So one of them holds the wheel and the other one means that the wheel can't go a certain direction. And that's all a click is really trying to do. But this is also my first time working on a click like this. And what that means is I screwed up and I forgot to put it in. So get a little bit of grease on it, and then I'm going to put this wheel back on again. No big deal, right? This is something that happens sometimes, especially when you're working on a watch movement for the first time. That's a big step. There's only so many watch movements in the world. There's a lot of them, but even though they all work in a similar way, think about working on an engine on a car, right? If you know how to work on one specific type of engine all the time on a car, then you know all the little tricks to it and all that. All engines and all cars work roughly the same way. So you theoretically could work on any engine if you knew how to work on them. But it really does help to work on the same one a few times over and over. You'll see consistencies within the same company, even within the same country or region. They will have different practices for how they build these movements and how they solve the little problems that the little engineering problems that are faced when you're building a watch. It's really interesting once you understand how they work and you start opening them up to see how things changed both regionally, but also over time, and then within country to country too. It's really fascinating once you get inside and start noticing these things. But the good news is that this is an ETA or an ETA, 2390 from Switzerland. This is a very straightforward and mass-produced movement, or at least it's similar to a lot of mass-produced movements. So this one doesn't have any particular curveballs, except for that click was the only thing that was a little bit different. Okay, now I'm applying some grease here because I'm going to put the cannon pinion back on. Now this one is not actually held on by friction, though every other watch I've worked on has been. So here's another small difference with these ETA movements. It's actually held on a different way, but it works just fine. And again, I'm just applying a little tiny bit of grease to the post here so that when these wheels spin, they have a little bit of lubricant there. And those two wheels are what they call the minute and hour wheels. They actually, the hands will spin at the rate that those spin. This is just an intermediary wheel. This just takes, when you pull out the watch crown and turn it to set the time, that gets engaged and then turns the other two, as you can see. So not a super critical part, but of course it does, everything matters. Just need to clear off a little space here. And this is what we call the setting lever. That's the thing that allows you to change from winding the watch to setting the watch to winding the watch as you click and pull out the crown on the side of your watch. Again, just a little bit of grease here to make sure that these parts engage and disengage smoothly. And the trick really is to put on the least amount, like less than you would think. Which is kind of funny. And now with the yoke. So this is the part that I was thinking of before, but this is the actual one, not the click spring. And the yoke does have a spring. This is it right here. Yeah, that's a spring. It's just a little U-shaped spring, and all it does is apply pressure. But as always, these things are very tricky because they have to go in a very specific spot in a very specific way. And it can be hard because they do kind of want to jump away from you when you're working on them. And it just did. And it's brutal because you have no idea where they go. And in this case, this thing was gone for a while. Like I had the flashlight out and, you know, the classic down on the ground, looking at my clothes, seeing what because it's so small and so light. It ended up flying just on a different part of my desk. But this time I'm getting a little better at it. And I was able to really kind of pin it down with the pegwood. And then the rest is easy. And now I've got that spring tension on that arm exactly where it's supposed to be, and disaster has been averted, but clearly something I need to work on. A little bit of grease here. Again, just for any moving parts that are going to be grinding up against each other, just a little touch of grease really goes a long way to help them stay good. And that's really important on watches, especially ones that you want to keep in your family for a long time, because these parts can be harder and harder to find over time. So you might think, oh, it's fine, it'll still run. And it probably will, but that part will fail at some point, and then you're going to need to replace it. And that could be a real pain. You could have to wait months on eBay to replace it. Now, on a watch like this, that's actually not the case. The ETA 2390, you can find parts for it still because it was a commonly produced watch. But as you work on watches, you of course want to employ your best practices, right? The best way to do it time and time again. So now I've got the keyless works almost all together. There's this little bridge thing that goes over the top of the motion works, and then we can actually give it a test. Okay, so now we're going to put the winding stem in. And again, we need to apply tactfully a little bit of grease here to make sure that it can operate smoothly for the long term. And then we can give this a test to see if it properly winds the watch. So that will tell us if the click is working correctly and if the mainspring barrel and the mainspring and everything's in there correctly. And then we can also pull it out to have it test the motion work, so to see if it can set the hands. And it looks like it's working fine here. It's winding up the watch just fine, and the click seems to be working. So now I'll pull it out to the hand setting position and give it a wind, and it is working. You can see that it's moving the parts that it's supposed to move there. In the middle part of the watch. But I can actually feel this should operate very, very smoothly. And I can feel what feels like a slight tension or grind. And I don't know why. But that really shouldn't happen. Like it should be completely smooth. So we need to investigate this because it's not right. So I'm going to take off that bridge and see if I can just see if all of the leaves of the wheels are engaging properly. It's a very simple thing happening. It's just those three wheels, the intermediate wheel and then the minute and hour wheel. So I don't know what's going on with it. And I need to really kind of fiddle around to figure it out. And I'm going to start off with the Canon Pinion and make sure that it moves smoothly the way, in its seat. And it seems to. So I'm happy with that. Then the hour wheel. And I'm going to try it again here after just having looked. I did lubricate each part already, so that isn't the issue. And see how it feels, because it's just, it should feel right. And I'll tell you, it still is just fighting a little bit. And I'm not happy with it. I know how it's supposed to feel, and it doesn't feel the way that it is. So we're going to have to investigate further. And this is a real pain because I don't really know what the deal is, and it's going to be hard to figure out, but I'm just going to have to start looking at every part and seeing if I can find some type of thing. Now, this is what I found. This is insane, but that intermediate pinion, look at this. On the top, it veers in a little bit. Do you see how it's just bent down on the top, but here on the bottom, it's completely flat? That little tiny thing only goes in one way. And by the way, just to show you, this is what it looks like in my hand. Just to like zoom out for a second and show you how small these parts are that we're dealing with. That's what that looks like in my hand. So it turns out that it actually does have a top and a bottom, even though at glance it looks like it's just a, rounded off thing. And if you put it in with that rounded off part on the top facing down, that is the difference. That is the difference between it working but feeling not right and between it working and feeling just right. So, okay, so we figured out that little bump in the road and put everything back in accordingly to get it to run as smoothly as possible. And that means that we can continue the rebuild and go back on the other side of the watch. Now, this is going to be the pallet forks going back in. Now, these needed a good cleaning as well. And I'm not surprised. Remember, the watch was stuck, and that could have been the point at which it was stuck if the pallet forks weren't allowing the power to go through. It's absolutely possible that that was the case. So once again, very gently, we're going to put those in. And here's the pallet fork bridge. And this is the same procedure as putting in those wheels above, but the difference is there's only one pivot on the top and one jewel it needs to go into, which makes it way easier than trying to line up 3 or 4. And now I can just double check to see that it's winding and then put a little wind in it. And then the power should be going through the train of wheels to the escape wheel, and it should be going back and forth there on the pallet forks. And it looks like it is. So that's a good step. Now I'm going to get what we call one dip out here. And this is a solvent that is used for cleaning. And I'm just going to make sure that this balance is cleaned perfectly, and as much any extra residue of any potential lubricant that was used before, dirt, grime, anything is done. I'm going to use a blower just to sort of agitate the air around it. And then what we need to do after it's been in the one dip for a little while is to dry it off. Now, this is a solvent, so it evaporates quite quickly, but I can use this blower just to make sure that any potential remaining cleaner on it is gone. And I'll flip it over and do the same. This is actually how I used to clean all my parts before I got the watch cleaning machine. It's very tedious, but it is effective. And then we get to try to put it in the watch. And this is, of course, the big moment, because if we can put it in the watch and the watch runs, we have a running timepiece here and we have revived this thing. If we put it in the watch and it doesn't work, it's back to square one on troubleshooting. So let's put this thing in and see if it'll go. This is always the best part of building a watch, is the anticipation. This is the exciting part. And look at that. The pallet fork picked it up almost right away and started to make it run. Now, it does look like it's stopping here, but that's fairly typical. We'll get this screw in and we'll see if it'll actually run. Give it a little kickstart. And it's going. Yes. So this is a great feeling. This is why you do this hobby, honestly, is to see that balance wheel kick up again on a watch that was previously dead. And we have ourselves a running watch. Now, how well it's running, who knows, right? That part we'll figure out in a little while. But the fact that it went from being a complete non-runner to a watch that's actually working is incredible. And it's a great feeling. So now we need to lubricate the jewels on the top and bottom of the balance. And these are, of course, very critical jewels. And as you can see, though, they actually have a a shock system. That's a spring that I just pulled out of the way that lets, if the watch were to say hit the ground, that spring would flex and allow the balance inside to move around a little bit. And that means that it wouldn't snap, which it often does. So now I'm going to take out the jewel, and I'm sorry it's off camera or my hand covered the camera, but I'm going to use Rodico to do this. That's that sticky, silly putty stuff because it can just grab that whole setting. And then off camera, I'm going to lubricate it and then put this jewel setting back in. And lubricating it is extremely tricky business, but I guess I did it. So now I just need to simply push this springs back on. And while this can be extremely finicky, I found that for me, I'm generally pretty good at it. And I know some watchmakers on YouTube have a really hard time with these, but I've actually been pretty lucky. And I don't know, I haven't had one fly off on me or anything. So there we go. And just need to clean this up just a little bit. And there we go. Now this one's on the bottom. And so I'm going to do the same procedure that I did on the top. Remove the bottom. And you can see that's the pivot moving around in the hole right there. I like to put these down even after I've taken it off just because they're so extremely small and delicate. Bending them is trivially easy. You breathe on them wrong and they bend. And so even just for the minute that I'm going to take to clean the jewel and put the lubricant on, I like to just put them back down. This is easily one of the most finicky I mean, I'm doing this on a microscope. Like, it's about as finicky as it gets. So back in with the jewel setting, that's actually two parts. It's called a cap and then the jewel itself. And like I said, I'm getting pretty good at that part. So now it's time to test this thing and see how it does on the time grapher. So the answer is not very good. In fact, terrible. So I'm going to attempt to adjust the rate of this and see if I can get it to work right. But the bottom line is that it's all over the map. Look at that reading, plus 102, plus 36, plus 61. It's really, really terrible. And I mean, now it's minus 110, minus 150. This thing is just a complete mess. And I'm really disappointed because it looked like it was running okay. And I was like pretty excited that we had gotten it back. And now it's just a disaster. I mean, minus 52, minus 50. And then all of a sudden it's running fast somehow. And this is exactly what you don't want to see. Now it's plus 6 seconds. So I need to do some investigating. And I actually do this off camera. And I realize that the balance spring is not seated correctly. And that's why we're getting this up and down and all around thing that extremely erratic readings. So I'm going to seat it correctly and then attempt to adjust it on the regulator. Again, that's what I was doing there before and see how that comes out. And look what happened. This is awesome. Like 277 degrees of amplitude is pretty strong for an old watch like this. Beat error 0.1 milliseconds. 0 is perfect. 0.1 is totally great. And the rate is between 0 and minus 3 seconds a day. For a vintage watch, this is incredible. And I'm really happy. That was the only thing I needed to do was just make a slight adjustment to the hairspring and then regulate it and boom. Unbelievable results. Really, from a watch that was completely stopped and a non-runner altogether to this is incredible. Also, you know, it means that depending on how long it was not running, might have actually worked for us because maybe somebody said, it's broken and threw it in a drawer. And that means that this watch was effectively not used as much as it would have been. And now it cleaned up beautifully and is running awesome. So I'm super stoked on that. So now we can continue with the build, and that starts by putting this beautiful dial on. I love this dial. Super simple, super legible, but really nicely patinaed as well. You can see it's got that kind of cream color. Love that. And so first things first, we're going to put the dial screws in, but they're weird. Like I said, there was 2 different sizes, but you just run what you brung, as they say in the business. So now it's time to get the hands out. And this is a problem too, because that seconds hand was literally just floating around in the case. And that's something that we're going to have to figure out as well. But first things first, the hour hand goes on. And I'm going to use a tool here from Version that pushes it on. It's a really simple tool. It's just a nylon tip, so it's soft so it won't scratch anything, that has a hole in the middle so that you can kind of push around the edges. That's it. It's not a complicated tool, but it is a very handy one. Now the minute hand goes on. You can still see those 2 rust spots. I'm not going to clean those off, by the way. I don't ever really clean dials or mess with dials. I think that it's a lot of the story of the watch is contained in the dial. And look, if it's got some weird stuff going on, then it does. This one has a cool, it almost looks like reverse star night behind it, like with the dots. So this looks okay. I can set it, and the hands are going in the appropriate times and resetting back. You know, they're running the appropriate relative to each other. And now we can try to put on this the seconds hand that was, again, kind of floating around in the case. Now the seconds hand doesn't have to line up with the other hands perfectly because it runs on its own. And okay, this works. So the seconds hand attaches, and I'm going to be very delicate with it, but it does seem to be on the pinion and working. So let's see if it oh. Okay, well, now the minutes hand just ran right into the seconds hand and knocked it off. So it looks like I might need to put it on a little bit harder, a little further down on the pinion to make it work. And so let's see if that works. And the answer is absolutely not. So this seconds hand is interfering with the movement of the minutes hand. So I'm going to try to adjust that. You can kind of rock these hands back and forth a little bit to get them so that they're parallel to each other. So we'll try that now. And okay. Oh, nope. It's getting hung up again, and it's again colliding with it. So let's take a look at this hand under the microscope. And as you can see, it doesn't have the normal makeup of a hand. It simply just has a hole in the top, which means either a part's missing, or it was never there, or it's worn out. It's hard to say, really, but this isn't how a hand is supposed to look. So we're going to have to set that aside for the moment, and I'll deal with it in just a little bit. Now, I do want to try out getting this thing cased up, because I noticed that when I got it, the dial was sitting too far forward on the case and actually was touching the case. And you can see that barely there as I do it, that the dial's not fit correctly for the case. But what I realized is 2 things. And this is the first one. There was some pretty serious rust on the inside of the case here, and it came off a little bit, but we needed to actually deal with this as well, because this case, rust is really not what you want to see. A little bit of staining is one thing. I can just take the crystal out by pushing with my thumbs, by the way, which is normal. But this case needs a little bit of attention. So I'm going to go back to my trusty ultrasonic machine, which means we need some water. And this is some ultrasonic cleaning detergent. And in goes the case. And we'll run it for a little while, not in a big hurry. And as you can hear, it kind of messes with the camera speakers, but yeah, and it is also very loud. So we let it run for a while, and let's see what we came away with here. All right, much better. There's still a few spots on there that I can try to deal with individually to knock off, some of the edges and make sure that it's okay. But a much improved case from where we were before. As you can still see, there's still a little bit of rust deposits here and there, but again, much better than we had before. So I'll clean those up with the pegwood. And yeah, there's quite a bit on there. And then we'll get back to getting this movement back in the case. And what I discovered from this was that the movement ring was actually what was meant to hold the dial back from touching the front of the case. And those little arms on the side were the one that was bent at the very beginning of the video. That is why the dial was actually hitting. So I replaced it with a new one. just from a kit that I have. And that worked just fine. So now you can see the hands can go freely and the dial isn't touching the case. So we've solved that problem and got this thing just about ready to run again. And I'm pretty happy with this, at least so far, with how it's come along. But that said, there's still some stuff to do here. So let's get a strap put on this watch. The lug width, that's the distance between those two lugs at the bottom. You can measure it with one of these little tools or anything, really. They come in fairly standard sizes. This one's an 18 millimeter lug width. So I'll need to find a watch strap for my collection that is 18 millimeters. And I found one that doesn't really, this is like a handmade black watch, or I should say racing strap. But I just like this strap a lot. I just think it's beautiful, and I didn't currently have it on a watch, so I decided to throw it on this one. But of course, you know, you can put any type of watch that suits, or any type of strap that suits you on this. And we'll get an idea of how it looks in its nearly final form. But looking at it, well, it looks nice. I mean, seriously, like, this watch has come such a long way. But it has a couple of things that need to get addressed before we're done with it. And the first one is going to be the crystal of the watch. It is really beat up, and you can see it here. I mean, you can see how dirty it is. I can just pop it out, but it's also just extremely scratched up. These are made from acrylic. They're soft, very durable, but as you can see, and durable, what I mean is they don't shatter or anything, very rarely, but they are very scratch prone. So what we need to do is get a new crystal. So I've done that. I measured it out, and 29.4 millimeters, which is what that 294 means, is what I measured it out at. But I was taught to always order a size up from what you've measured, because sometimes things aren't exactly what they seem. It's worn, or it's in there, or whatever. So let's do a test fit on the 294. And unfortunately, there's actually some wiggle room, and it doesn't sit in there at all. So thank you. Actually, in this case, the person I took the class from, which is Mark Lovick over at the Watch Repair channel. You should definitely be checking that out if you're into this stuff. It kind of taught me everything I know for the most part. I've took all his classes online and watched all of his videos. So this one does look like it's the right size, the 296, but in order to make it fit, we need to take out the rober press. So this is a crystal press, and we'll take these two dies. One goes on the bottom, one goes on the top, and I'll show you how it works. So the one on the bottom is just a soft die. And the one on the top is meant to go around the edge of the crystal. Okay, so what's going to happen is we're going to put the watch over the soft die just hanging there, then the crystal, then we'll put the rounded die on top, the aluminum one. And what it's going to do is we're going to press it down, and it's just going to press it around the soft die gently. It's going to bend it. And what that's going to do is temporarily, at least while it's bent, it will be smaller in diameter. And then we can bring up the watch case to it, hold it there, and then undo the press, and it will expand into the slot that it's designed for. So first things first is to get it pressed down. I use a piece of bag just to prevent any potential scratching. So you don't need to overdo this, but just get it firmly in there and then give it a few extra turns so that you know that it's kind of pressed it down a little bit and has bent it. Now, I know it's hard to see, and I do apologize, but what I'm doing is I'm bringing the watch case up to the crystal, making sure that it's seated, holding it down, and then just simply undoing the rober press. Rober is the brand name of the press, by the way. There's other ways to do this too. And then it expands into the slot, and now we can just check it out and see how we did. And there we go. I can push on it with my thumbs and it doesn't come out, which is about the amount of pressure that you need. This is not a diver watch or anything like that. And it looks great. So we've got the crystal in there. And what I did in between is I actually took the seconds hand and I put it on I was not able to film this because it was far too intricate to actually film, but I put it on my staking set. And I sort of pushed down and manipulated the top of it so that it would flatten out the top of that seconds hand and give it something to grab onto, and it worked. The seconds hand is basically dead anyway. There's no reviving it. But as you can see, I actually got it to work, and this watch is done. I could not be happier with it either. This thing is absolutely gorgeous. It's got a really cool story behind it, not just in the sense that it's a an old watch dating back to the 50s, but it has a couple of really neat things about it that are good conversation starters or ways to help people understand why these little things that we all love are so interesting. And one of them is the fact that it's from Abercrombie and Fitch, which has a completely different brand now. It's upscale clothes marketed towards young people. I mean, we're talking about completely off brand from what it was before. Before, it was a hardcore outfitter, really the place you would go if you were going to go on a long trip. For those of you that have in the States that have an REI next to you, right? It was something along that lines, but like think upscale, really expensive, exotic stuff. I mean, they sold guns and tents and, stuff like that, completely different. So it's really cool to say, is that the same Abercrombie and Fitch that I'm thinking of? And you can say, yeah, it is. It's the same one. It's just from a different time. And like I said, they ended up, using the Swiss watch companies, sometimes Heuer, which is one of my favorite watch companies. I own a bunch of watches from old Heuer before they were Tag Heuer, to make the movements even. This one was based off of an ETA movement, as we talked about before. But these are nice Swiss watches that they did to their specification. So in this case, again, this was a fairly simple time-only watch, but there's ones with tide indicators, with an alarm, things that you would need when you are out camping or hiking or on an adventure of some sort. And it's just a totally different look from Abercrombie and Fitch. Then the other thing that I really like about this watch is that we are able to kind of figure out its story, right? Somebody wore this a lot and used it. And then I think it stopped working, and I think that they put it in a drawer and forgot about it. Because one of the cool little things about this watch are those two discolorations that you can see, so that you can see exactly what time it was when this watch actually died. And I'm leaving those on there. I'm not going to try to clean them up. And what that means is we get a little bit of an extra story because the hands were at that position for so long that it actually discolored the dial underneath them disproportionately. And again, these are just the neat little things that you can find to love about vintage watches and restoring them. All in all, I'm really happy with how this watch came out, and I'm thrilled that it keeps such good time as well, because there are certainly some problems that are above my pay grade, as they'd say, when it comes to fixing these things. And the fact that we were able to sort out all the issues with the watch, from the crystal to the hands to the movement, and even some rust on the case, and get it back into service is a real thrill. Thank you so much for coming along for this adventure with me. If you want to, you can follow on Instagram. I post pictures of the projects as they're going, and even some videos, some tool highlights, and some pictures of the watches in my personal collection. And of course, you can like and subscribe as you see fit. I'll leave that up to you. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.